Let's continue with our next speaker. Dr. Janis Phelps, Director of Psychedelic Therapies and Research at the California Institute of Integral Studies. As the founder and the professor of the center, she launched the very first university-accredited postgraduate program in the psychedelic therapy and research. Dr. Phelps is leading voice in shaping the training and competencies of future psychedelic therapies. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Janis Phelps.
Hello, everyone. I'm super happy to be here. My voice left the plane as I was flying here, so I'm here with a scratchy voice, but I'm here happily, so please bear with me while my voice comes and goes. So I'd first like to start out, with telling you a bit about my professional disclosures, so you know who is speaking up here. And I guess just the main part is I'm very proud to be consulting with SAPT, a forerunner in my whole field of training therapists. I work also consulting with the other universities and institute that you see listed here. And I'm a proud board member of the Hefter Research Group, happy to have sponsored money for Dr. Voss, who just presented his great work. And I work with ADEPT and ISSP in Hanover, and I've been Dean of Faculty at my university, CIIS. And is a tradition that started of late. Most of us in the United States who are presenting in the psychedelic field are coming to do this, which is a cultural disclosure, so you can bear witness to who's speaking to you and take under consideration my background. So I'm a white, hetero, cis female from a middle-class family, which accelerated the opportunities to which I grabbed and availed myself to get a PhD in clinical psychology. I have gratitude to my BIPOC and LGBTQ plus friends who have and are helping me be a better ally. I have gratitude to my Peruvian teachers in ayahuasca ceremony, Amelia, Ronnie, and Jose, and my Euro-American teachers, Sasha and Anne, Ralph, Jack and Ricky, and Stan. And I'm living on unceded lands of the coastal Miwok of Marin County, that's just north of San Francisco, and I dedicate mountain walks to their lost lives and culture. So, what I'm going to do is give you an overview of why start an academic training program at a university. Then we'll go into the training context just a little bit, and then my main act here with you is to share with you some of the very interesting challenges as well as innovations that we found helpful over the 9 years of running this program. And the main reasons you can see here on the slide, there's been an upsurge in clinical and public interest in the topic. You all know that well, you're here. We need thousands of facilitators and researchers for the FDA, Health Canada, and EMA research. We need clinicians and clergy and facilitators to help people out in the public domain to be able to integrate their work. And lastly, obviously, to help with harm reduction, which you will be hearing about in depth from the next eloquent speaker. So, here's an overview of what we do. Our program is shorter than the SAPT program. It lasts for 1 year rather than several. We have 120 hours in the classroom. Excuse me, it's a combination of online and in person, the vast majority of which is in person, and it includes holotropic breath work on one of the weekends. It has 30 hours of mentoring and independent inquiry by the students. So it's 17 days in classes over 10 months, and then there's another 2 months in which students finish their papers or their projects and pass their exam. And I'd like to do an analogy. I just saw Philip in the hallway that he and I were thinking similar things when I brought Mount Everest into my slide deck, and you'll see why I did. So, highest peak at 8,800 meters, first ascent recorded anyway, by Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzin Norgay in 1953. And there have been over 12,000 successful ascents and approximately 340 deaths. So there's a comparison here to be made, as Philip did, and I will here. Mountain climbing and psychedelics are both aided spiritual ascents, or following Kurt's lead, transcendent ascents. You don't conquer the mountain, you conquer yourself. The climb is a sacred struggle, a mirror to the soul, if you will. And joy, even while feeling exhausted, is the summit of the soul on such a climb. And setting intentions with Everest, here's what the mountain climbers have said. It is not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. And he's referring to the transformative power of climbing, reflecting the idea that the most significant challenge and achievement in mountaineering lies within. It's quite a remarkable thing to have said. Climbing Everest is often described as a journey inward, and that from Jen Whitaker. Now to emphasize the people who often don't get emphasized enough, and those are the Sherpas who help the mountaineers get to where they're going. And these experiences are made possible by these most often indigenous people. Where we come from in our world of psychedelic facilitation, we're not called Sherpas, obviously. We tend to be called sitters, therapists, guides, or facilitators, but we have a lot in common with a Sherpa's role. First is they're guardians of the sacred. In their culture, they view Everest as a goddess. They spiritually infuse reverence for the mountain into the journey. Before expeditions, they often perform puja ceremonies to ask for safe passage, blessing the climbers and the gear. They're the embodiment of humility and strength. They exemplify a quiet strength, resilience, and humility. And their contributions are often under-acknowledged, as I just mentioned. And you may know this if you know about the mountaineering world. Oh yeah, you're from Switzerland, most of you. You know this then. Yet they are the backbone of nearly every successful summit. And they also can be seen by and see themselves as spiritual guides. Beyond physical guidance, the Sherpas often serve as an emotional and spiritual anchor for the climbers, helping them to stay grounded, respectful, and connected to the deeper meaning of the journey. Sounds a bit like what one would do as a therapist or facilitator for a psychedelic journey, huh? So this is the beginning of what I'd like to talk about for doing training in a Euro-American kind of way for psychedelics. All training programs, in my humble opinion, need to focus on ways to align with and highlight wisdom and feedback from indigenous teachers who have learned age-old traditions of healing with plants, especially psychedelic plants, but not only psychedelic plants. We have found that co-creating an indigenous advisory committee to help avoid appropriation of their wisdom, traditions, and spiritual worldviews and ceremonial processes was very important for them to give us feedback where we might have overstepped in any of these several ways, which is very easy to do. Unfortunately, very easy to do. I also like to mention that we have come to more and more acknowledge the contributions of facilitators who've been serving others in the psychedelic underground for decades while also protecting their privacy. That's no small feat, being able to do that. And so what about harm reduction on and off the mountain? In a US report recently, it's been found that 266% increase in hallucinogen use occurred in those 11 years that you see there. And in 2023, in a Canadian study, 52% of psychedelic users reported having an intensely challenging experience. 45 of them, interestingly, thought no good came of the challenging experience. In a U.S., and these were unfacilitated, unsherpified journeys. And in a U.S. study from also 2023, 8.9% of users reported functional impairment with psychedelics, and 2.6% of these users required professional help. This is a backdrop for why the facilitation is so important. And I wanted to share with you something we do in our classes. We teach meditation and mindfulness as part and parcel of one's skill base for doing this work. So I'd like to invite you to take a few seconds, rather than you listening with that part of your brain that processes verbal material, which you've been doing all day. Take a moment just to look at that image. Rest your eyes on it. See how you feel in your body. Move your body if you're uncomfortable anywhere. How do your shoulders feel, your hips? Take a deep breath if you'd like to. Just get a bit more embodied. This is an embodiment moment. So one could ask, how do we choose our particular trainees? Firstly, we look for those with the training in therapy or medicine, social advocacy, trauma work, case management, and community nonprofits. We also look for those who integrate mindfulness, Tai Chi, other spiritual practices, self-care, and somatic practices into their daily lives, because this tells us they know how to take care of themselves, so they won't be too impacted by secondary trauma or getting disembodied during a journey with someone else while they're being a facilitator. We also look for those who respond clearly and positively to a case about boundaries and dual relationships. As you know, in our field, some of the greatest harm has come from the therapist not staying in a bounded area and forgetting what ethical behavior looks like and feels like. So we weed out those who don't seem to understand that from the very beginning. We also value those who understand about the need for diversity of ideas in the field, diversity of representation, including people from marginalized communities, and creating belonging in community. We want people who are, as you heard, I think it was the very beginning with Federico, how someone who's willing to contribute to community and do selfless service is a primo kind of person to do this work. And then lastly, this is patently obvious, we look for people whose goals are consistent with what we're doing in the program, so they want to do the work in the ways in which we're teaching people to do the work. So we've been doing this since 2016, and the first changes we made in this program, now I'm moving into telling you about things we've learned in specifics. You now know enough about the background. I'll dive in. We've changed in size, we've changed in our eligibility requirements for people to have permission to even apply to the program. We expanded our teacher representation early on. We expanded our size again. In 2019, we got a big grant of $1 million and let in more trainees because we were very concerned. That was around the time we thought, oh, MDMA will be rescheduled in 2021, psilocybin a year and a half after that in the United States. Of course, we were wrong, but that was our idea at the time. So we expanded our size, which meant we needed to change other aspects of the program. The pandemic then moved us all online, which was not a good situation. No one was happy with it, but we didn't want to stop training people. And as soon as we could, we went back to in-person work after the pandemic subsided. We created a capstone project, and we got approved in the state of Oregon to train people with psilocybin. And then more recently in 2024-25, we created affinity groups and community circles, which I'll tell you about. We again expanded eligibility this year, just this fall, and we added a final exam. And here's the clinician and chaplaincy and clergy people. You can just look at the boxes there and get a feel for the wide range of people we've been training from clinical backgrounds. Then this year, as I mentioned, we've expanded our eligibility, and we've allowed in people in the second bullet item, applicants with advanced degrees in, of course, medicine, mental health, or allied health. Those are the terms in the US, but you could imagine all the kinds of people who work in clinics or work in hospitals. And then we also let in people who have an advanced degree in any social science, even anthropology, for instance, sociology, the humanities and the arts, as well as the hard sciences. I think we have 3 engineers with us this year. And then we've allowed in people who are attorneys if they're working in nonprofit or community-based ways, and they've gotten some background in coaching or therapy. And then we've let in a few people at the bachelor's level, but not many. And you might be wondering, why did we do that? We're guessing that if the FDA even does approve, that they will do as they've done in several protocols in the last 3 years, where they will let the second person in the dyad of the therapeutic research team be someone who has a BA in mental health. And they, by and large, have not determined in any definition what mental health is. And there's no degree in the United States in mental health at the BA level. So the research teams have been defining that for the FDA, and the FDA has said, okay, which is really remarkable. So we're letting in these other people now this year because we'd like to train people who can fill out the full dyadic need that we'll have, assuming things go well in the United States with rescheduling. Something else we've done in this particular program is we've gone from a more narrow set of teachers who would teach several separate topic areas. This is a typical way of a university to do things. We might have had 12 to 15 people back then. And then as we got more well-known and people came to work with us and wanting to work with us, we expanded. So you no doubt notice and recognize some of the names on this list. And what we did in this regard is we developed the expansion of this list according to several markers. We obviously needed to cover the content, but we were covering the content we had well in the first few years without the expansion, but bringing in different voices and more representation meant we'd bring in more women. We had a lot of men at the time. We bring in more indigenous people. We bring in people from a Hispanic, African American, or white background, LGBTQ, IA plus people who were clinicians, generally clinicians, policymakers, researchers, and clinically oriented attorneys, all of whom would give a different background, a different idea of a certain flavor of the topic at hand. And I have found it very helpful for Janis Phelps to say something about mindfulness during prep sessions, and someone else teaching 2 weeks later say something the opposite. And we ask our students to relish the differences and the contradictions and hold it and find which works for them and which doesn't, and use their minds. And just notice the people who are teaching with them and see if there's anything they might want to emulate. So we have found differences of opinion among the teachers has been very fruitful. So our model is not that we're teaching from one perspective at all. We're teaching from multiple perspectives, but we need to cover particular areas, which I'll tell you about in a moment. And I thought it might be helpful for you to see an interesting stat. When I started this program, I didn't think this would happen. I thought we would get mostly psychologists and MA-level therapists. But look at this. Our majority of people in our program come from medicine. And then the master's level people and then the psychologists, and we have loads of nurses who are with us. And the average years these people have been licensed is 15. These are seasoned clinicians. Very interesting. And their average age is 46. 26% of them identify as BIPOC. There's more cis females, women in the program than men, and that's a stat that holds true for graduate programs throughout the United States in psychology and psychiatry and other areas of medicine. More women are being drawn to the field. 2% non-binary, and 31% identified as LGBTQ+, and we have not as many veterans or service members as we would have expected, but that's at 7%. So that gives you an idea of who's been in the program. And now I'm going to go through, aside from the changes we made about bringing in more teacher representation, the second thing that we've done is we've needed to change how we do mentoring based on how we've grown. We grew from 42 students the first year, 65 the second year. We did a huge change for us to go to 114 or something the third year. And then we got that large grant, and we had one class of 180 people. That went okay, but we all decided on my team, we're not going to do that again. It was too many people. They couldn't build good community, and we didn't get a chance to really get to know each of them. So in 2019, we went from individual meetings with our mentors, and I just glossed over this at the beginning of the description of the program. All the students have a mentor who's an expert in the field. They're either a researcher or a clinician, or they're an indigenous person who knows ceremonial ways, or some mix of all three of these. And in 2020, because we had grown, we could not find enough eligible mentors who we thought were good enough to be supervising our students and representing the field in a good way. So we created groups, and I was skeptical that the trainees would like that, but I'd done lots of group supervision when I was teaching in the PhD clinical psychology program where I work now. And you learn so much when you get supervised in a group. And lo and behold, it's been quite successful, and the mentors and the students have by and large loved it. So we've continued to do that. And they meet throughout the year. And the mentors act as a clearinghouse for us. If a student's struggling, students know that the mentors will let us know that they're having a hard time, and we're all transparent about that, but we keep confidentiality. So it's been very helpful to have the mentors with us. And they do an evaluation of the student's capstone project, which is either a paper or a project, which has been replaced this current year with a final exam. And something interesting we decided to do the third year was to add an integrity agreement. And this is something the students sign before they join our program. And we're asking them to be aware that we're training them to do legally sanctioned work. So we're training them to do legally sanctioned work. And they acknowledge the last piece here, that having signed this, that if they are found to be acting in ways that are out of alignment with this agreement, they will quickly be asked to leave the program. And we've needed to do that with an average of one student a year. 1 or 2 years we haven't needed to ask anyone to leave. For instance, I got a call from a brother of a man in the program who said, my brother is about to give MDMA to somebody. He hasn't even graduated yet. He doesn't know what he's doing. You have to stop him. I went, oh my. So we dealt with the student, and that was when I decided I needed an integrity agreement, so people would not be tempted to do that. Because unless you can do what SAPT is able to do, or what the ADEPT program in Amsterdam is able to do, or training programs elsewhere, unless you have experience giving the medicine to someone and being observed and supervised in several sessions, many sessions ideally, you're not ready to do this work. So our students know they're not ready to do this work, and yet that one gentleman was pushing the edge. So I have found this integrity agreement's been really helpful for us, for everybody to feel safe that this is a program at a legitimate university doing legitimate training for something only in a legal instance. So the only legal psychedelic kind of journey that one can do in the United States is ketamine in all states, and there are only 2 states in which one can use plants and be a facilitator. So I'm really glad we did this, although it wasn't comfortable to have to do it. So we also ask our mentors to do the same agreement, and the staff give verbal agreement to it. And once again, I'd invite you to take a nice deep breath. Enjoy the refreshment of not having to hear more words. Move your body around. Take a deep breath. What if you were that drop of water on that pond? Well, let's go to the next one. We have changed what we've done and how we assess the students at the end of the program. It's called summative assessment in English. We started out, this is a value I've held ever since I was working as a professor in master's level programs. I always loved asking my students to evaluate themselves. So we have a list of criteria and a Likert scale by which they will evaluate themselves and give us a narrative as to why they evaluated themselves that way. Some had a cringe effect on that. They didn't want to, but after they got into the flow of it, they relished it because they brought it to their mentor. And often students who were more negatively self-evaluative of their work got an eye-opener when the mentor told them, I don't think you're that. No, you said yourself too low. And you were a little high on this because I've noticed you don't feel this way, or you didn't know that, or you hadn't learned that piece. And so I found having the mentors and the students go over their evaluations together to be very formidable, and we haven't changed that one bit. And that's at the end of the program, so those are the 2 top boxes. The capstone project and paper, we are looking for funding to bring it back this year. We have had each student write a paper, some of which then got submitted for publication. Others do projects such as creating a protocol for their research team on a medical indication with a particular medicine, some of whom then went on to get funding for it and to execute it. And so it's been fun to see what our students do to create really interesting projects and papers. And then now we have a final quantitative exam, which is not the best way to evaluate a clinician or a facilitator, but it's required by the state of Oregon. And in order to be an approved program, we need to do it. So we're devising a multiple choice final exam for them, but we still have the mentors tell us how the student is doing. So if I can bring back with my team both the capstone and do the final exam, I think that will make it a better rounded program. And something else we've innovated, which is very, very helpful in the United States, where there's such a multiplicity of people with different backgrounds in the United States, we teach about beloved community. And our main teacher of this is Shirley Strong, who is one of our major consultants. And the part of this is when people come to the room and feel as if their worldview is not being represented appropriately by the teacher, we ask the teacher to step back and listen with respect and try very hard not to take personal the critique. And we also ask the students the same thing. We're all human beings here trying to feel our way through what it takes to be a good psychedelic therapist. And getting into argumentation and polarizing does not get you any closer to the depth of learning that one can have. So we practice disagreeing respectfully. We call people in rather than out. So we'll say something like, Janis, I know you meant well when you said that about this thing, but you really came on too strong about it, and you didn't remember that men or young people feel a certain way about it, and you talked down. And we then take a breath, because I just got called in, and then we teach our students to ask, okay, can you tell me more? And we ask the person who's going to say more to say it with the greatest kindness they can. So this is a practice in humility and a practice in kindness and a practice in confidence to be in a difficult situation socially. And it's a marker, we believe, for making a good therapist, any kind of therapist, but particularly a psychedelic therapist who can deal with discomfort without becoming polarized. And we do many things because we cannot use the medicine except for the students who come with us to Oregon. We can use psilocybin. So like many training programs, we do breath work, we do guided imagery, we do trance inductions primarily with drumming and rattling, and we do expressive artwork. The one in the middle, we've evolved. We had started doing improvisation role plays. We would give the students a script. You're the therapist. This is going on. You're not really sure what the client's feeling. And we'd say, client, you're feeling this. Act like this. And we found that it was better to give students more details and to be able to see one another's scripts, because we were inadvertently, I think, getting too many of the clinicians and medical docs nervous and anxious, and they weren't learning as quickly as when we gave them a script. And then later in the training program, we did the improvisation. It was a good lesson for us. And then we developed community circles a couple years ago, and these are facilitated by a consultant, not a teacher and not a staff person, someone who can be seen as neutral, who after the class day or during lunches, any student can go and talk about what happened that day, give their point of view, meet other people that they haven't met yet in their cohort. And it's a private conversation that they have with one another, and we find it's been great because it builds community. We have two types of groups. We have the mentor group, which I shared with you already. We also have what we call a home group, which in medical schools is sometimes called a pod in the United States, often a home group, where students are put together in a group of about 7 or 8 people based on what region of the planet they live on. So they can get to know at least those 6 or 7 other people a bit better than being in a large class. Excuse me, my voice calls. So these community circles have been as large as 30 people, and it enables people to meet not just those in their home group and their mentor group, but in a community circle. And the affinity groups are another addition we had a few years ago, and this is where we got a platform for our students to be able to talk with one another. Students were using signal groups, and we thought, let's provide them with something. So there's something in the English-speaking world called Mighty Networks. I don't know if you all have it here in Europe, but it's a platform where people can self-regulate and create affinity groups, and I listed a few of them there for you. And people join from multiple years. The ketamine practitioners actually did a little mini conference together, and that was part of the outcome of their work. And the palliative care practitioners in the California area created a seminar with one another, and they're busy working on supporting legislation in California to increase access to palliative care. And we introduced additional competencies around culture And the primary competencies that we have are the core competencies, research and ethics. We added in 2019 cultural competencies and cultural humility and structural competency for people to learn when there were marginalized groups who weren't getting access to the medicine or the therapeutic treatment, what they could do as a professional to use their privilege to help those people get access in their state, in their country, in their city. And we wanted to add that to our program. But before that, we really emphasized the first one there in the upper left, the core competencies of the healing presence of the therapist and the facilitator. We very much emphasized learning the hows and whys of random controlled studies and the values of qualitative research and case studies. And we definitely emphasized ethics, safety issues, identifying what might be an adverse moment for the person or how to sit with what isn't clearly an adverse moment yet, and how to offer support skills. So that's one change that we had this 6 years ago. And then we have had woes around continuing medical education. This is primarily for nurses and doctors and psychologists in the United States. And last year, our provider, who we'd been sponsored by, said, we're not going to sponsor this. The FDA just turned down psychedelics. It's too dangerous for our company to support continuing medical education at your university. You're going to have to find someone else. We were puzzled, dismayed, and we had no idea how hard it was going to find someone, because we probably canvassed 20 different organizations that would sponsor continuing medical education. We did find 2, and we went with one, and their only stipulation was that they get to see our curriculum beforehand. They absolutely need to see the CV and the background of this person and see who has employed this person, so they can vet whether the teacher is a safe enough teacher to give continuing medical education to, all of which are reasonable. And then they also asked us to keep a half hour in between a certified CME teacher and another teacher who might come after. So our students have benefited by having multiple half-hour breaks during our long day classes, and it's actually been a positive innovation for us. So you might be wondering, well, gee, you grew this. You went up to 180 after starting with 42. What have you learned? Well, the pros of having an interdisciplinary cohort that's on the large or small size, but where all those different kinds of clinicians and clergy come in together, regardless of the size, we found multiple points of view on concepts and topics have been helpful to people. There was an equalizing that happened. The medical doctors were intimidated by some of the therapists who knew how to do therapy, and they did not. The therapists were intimidated by the research-based pharmacologists and some of the medical people, because they knew a lot more about neuroscience and pharmacology than they did. So there was something of an equalization among all of them, and by building beloved community among them, we helped them feel comfortable as best they could with a non-hierarchical learning community. And I really am proud that we were able to do that, and I'm proud of our students that they went there with us. And then it's also practice for an interdisciplinary teamwork, which is what we're guessing will be happening in community-based work and in clinics, already is here in Switzerland and Netherlands and in Germany and the Czech Republic now. And by networking together, our graduates have produced 135 publications in peer-reviewed journals or books. It's huge what they've produced, those 1,400 people I was telling you about. The cons of having interdisciplinary teams, cohorts of training, is that we can't always get to the exact level of input we need to help that particular person develop the skill base, because we just can't. Excuse me. And we had to work at that discouraging of social hierarchies, what I was talking about, which seemed formidable. I've worked in hospitals and other types of medical centers, and as a psychologist, I just knew we were rowing up a very steep current, but it was totally worth it. And then the cons, finally, is that if you ask your graduate to go get more training in more advanced areas, like asking, say, a physiatrist to go take a class on therapy, that physiatrist probably isn't going to do it, or the therapist who doesn't understand about contraindications and drug interactions to go get a really good, focused, granular level pharmacology and neuroscience class. They're not going to do it. So there are some who did it, but not many. So my recommendations, and we're looking to move this way as we can get the funding for it, we'd like to design small cohort training by professions prior to the interdisciplinary classes that people come to. And we feel as if they had a month or two of the therapist learning more neurology and pharmacology and what's a drug interaction and how do I communicate if something adverse is going on and I don't even know the words to ask the nurse who's there on staff. That kind of class would be immensely helpful. And then you can get the best of both worlds. You can bring your variety of students together at one time and you can give them specific training beforehand. And I just wanted to crow a little bit about our alumni publications that I just shared with you. If you're interested in the document, it's a 19-page document with their publications at this QR code. And now coming full circle, and I can show you that code later if you didn't grab it right then. So remember the Sherpa file that I showed you? Here it is about the facilitator and the therapist. Our trainees connect to their own spiritual or meditative backgrounds in order to enhance their competency in this work. And I have a really great example for several agnostic students who claimed that our encouraging them to do something like this was anathema to where they wanted to go because they weren't religious, they weren't spiritual, but they loved hiking or they loved fishing. And so they connected that feeling of presence and contemplativeness while they were doing those activities, and that's what they set as an intention to bring into the therapy sessions with psychedelics. So maybe we could say instead of spiritual backgrounds, it could have been contemplative backgrounds. And they learned to infuse a reverence for the psychedelic journey. And before any meeting with a psychedelic client, we encourage them to do their own practice of meditation, whatever it might be, and to ask for safe passage for themselves and the client, especially around the client's intentions. And we ask them to embody quiet strength, resilience, and humility as core competencies from which you build on. We believe many people have this. I've seen 4-year-olds who have these qualities. Is it consistent in a 4-year-old? No. But as we grow, we can make these kinds of things consistent, and we don't necessarily need to have a clinical degree to teach us the importance of it. What we do know, though, is that the contributions of the therapist often get over-acknowledged or overemphasized by said therapists. And what we do in our program is we encourage people to recognize their own ego inflation and know that what's really happening here, the agency, is between the interaction of the medicine and the individual first and foremost, and that you're aiding and abetting a beneficial journey for them, but you're not the one making it happen, regardless of how wonderful your therapeutic alliance is. And we think of our therapists and facilitators as the anchors for being respectful, grounded, and connected to the deeper meaning of the journey. So this is what we just went over. And I'm really grateful for your attention, and I'm grateful to the organizers of this incredibly wonderful conference, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Phelps. Now we are ready for some questions.
Yes, please, let's do it.
So please raise your hand so we can see. We can give you a microphone if you have any questions.
Could I start out with a question for the group? How many of you have been trained at ADEPT or SAPT or another training organization? A few of you, great, great, wonderful. I know there are a couple CIIS graduates in the room. So for you all, hearing what we're doing at CIIS, I wonder if I've stirred some juices for you all about what was done differently in your program, what you think we're missing, what you would have liked to have had in your program that I just described. Or anything else you all might have a comment about.
Excuse me, I do have one question.
Please, thank you.
Given that your organization trains cohorts of students, I wonder what's your perspective on the potential of group therapy and group psychedelic therapy in comparison to individual? And have you had any experience with that with your cohorts? And so I'm curious about your perspective.
Thank you for that question. If humans have been doing this for millennia together in groups, there must be something good about it, huh? But the absence of good research on that whole question is quite thorough right now. So any of you who are researchers who'd like to turn your attention to this, we need more data. Brian Anderson and his team at the University of California in San Francisco did a great study based on his learning of ceremonial use of ayahuasca down in South America to be with survivors of AIDS who have been surviving for 50 years, and they did psilocybin in a group under a protocol approved by the university. That's an interesting study to look at the data, and it's in the public domain. It's out on Google Scholar. What our students in Oregon are learning is that doing it in groups is more cost effective. It may not be that everyone who's getting put in that group is compatible with other group members, so they're getting anecdotal information about what types of people seem to be compatible with one another and at what level of symptomology you need to have somewhat in parity, or how much variety of some symptomologies you can have be really differential. But the data doesn't exist on that right now except for anecdotal evidence. Nor do we have data on, well, how many facilitators need to be in a group with 10 people? What's ideal? And what do the facilitators need to have in common, and what kind of differences among the facilitators do you need so that different levels of expertise or strengths are represented? Peter Gasser and Anka, I know, taught here last year in your conference, and I see them as primary teachers in this regard, so I'd encourage you to look at their written work as well. Thank you for that question. I think it's where we're going in the future for many political and economic reasons, and humanity's been doing groups for eons.
Thank you. Very interesting talk. I think I understood that in Oregon you have people in your training program that can benefit from a personal experience with psilocybin. Is that correct?
What the Oregon, the Oregon Health Authority asks for them to observe a group being run or an individual session. They don't talk to the person receiving the psilocybin. They don't give the person the psilocybin. But after they have that experience, then they can be part of a group or do a dyadic treatment for someone who's an individual. But in Oregon right now, anyone can go to Oregon and have a self-experience.
Okay, that allows me to ask my question. What do you think of therapists having a personal experience with psilocybin or other psychedelic substances?
Oh, the ever-present question. How long do we have here? I know that some people, excuse me, some therapists for personal or physiological reasons decide that they don't want to have a psychedelic. For those who have a physiological reason, I understand that. The more personal psychological reasons for not doing the psychedelic and wanting to work with psychedelics, I think bears scrutiny and some looking at on the part of people who would approve this person to do the work. But I'm a very strong advocate of everyone who can do it physically to have an experience with the molecule or the plant they're going to be giving to someone else so they know their terrain and they can speak from that understanding. And they can normalize it when it gets difficult. Just a sec. So the thing I can share with you is that even though I feel this strongly, I've written about it this way, most of my colleagues that I'm affiliated with agree with this. It's an easy place to take a stand. When we first opened this program, I thought, okay, what am I going to do about this? You're saying this is your professional stance. How are you going to have your students have a self-experience? I was not willing to take our students down to Mexico to do San Pedro or mushrooms because of liability, or to send them to an ayahuasca retreat center after having vetted that retreat center. And programs that got developed after us did that, and things went sideways and not well for both the university and the students. So I was very grateful. I was on the conservative side. So when our students sign that integrity agreement, it's only that they don't give a plant or a molecule to someone else that's illegal to do, but they're receiving it. It's their own cognitive liberty. And we don't encourage it outright, but students know that we value self-experience. So right now, about half of our students are wanting to go up to Oregon to get to the point where they can work with psilocybin right away. We could talk a long time about that, but thank you for the question. SAPT, I think, has been brilliant. I want to give a shout out to Helena Atcher for getting a protocol approved so that the students in SAPT can avail themselves of a time with psilocybin under supervision. It's brilliant that SAPT's able to do that. Hi there.
Hello. Thank you so much for all this wisdom. My question goes to I would say like the pedagogical aspect of training the therapists or Sherpas, how you name them. What is the difference between what you did or what we're trying to do versus what has been already happening in Latin America or South America or any other indigenous communities in how they bring up and train their therapists? And my question goes mainly on how the limitations of our society with being it excessive regulation or capitalism or whatnot that does not allow us to go in certain steps that are necessary to build up the caliper or create the community for healing.
Yeah. That whole system of training is also parallel in some medical establishments where you do an apprenticeship and you prove your humility and your readiness for that apprenticeship by serving your teacher, the curandero or whoever it is, the maestro, for a while before you're deemed worthy to learn. And there are other communities, as you know, because you've asked the question, where the young ones are identified as someone who might have a healing capacity. in the community, and they get given certain attention to hone some skills that perhaps would make them someone who could be called a shaman or a curandera in their particular cultural environment. We don't have anything like that in the typical Euro-American frame. We've lost a lot in our industrial world, that we don't value that kind of learning. We call it shadowing in the United States and more medical areas, where you watch and you trail along behind that nurse or that psychologist, and you learn by watching and you learn by being supervised. But really, we do the quickest way through to get people to a baseline standard, and then hope, in the United States at least, that they go in their own integrity to get more training. And don't tell people that they can do anything beyond what they really can do. So there's a lot of trust, because in a capitalistic industrial society, we haven't found the way to do this well. So we have to trust that the clinicians will mind themselves, which is very important for me around ego inflation and truth in advertising. For another talk, I have a list of aspects of people who may claim to be doing this work, but you should avoid them, and one is calling themselves a healer. Unless they're coming from a community that has doffed them and said, this person represents us, this person's going to be the person who helps us get better physically, emotionally, spiritually. Don't go with that person. They're probably not legitimate, and there's a wee bit of narcissism lurking about somewhere.
Hi, Dr. Phelps.
We have one more question on the back.
Over here. Hi, thank you so much for your talk. It was great to learn about CIIS. I'm curious how your protocol kind of balances the inner direction of the psychedelic community with the U.S. focus on standardization and evidence-based practices, and how you think the FDA will start to regulate these kinds of protocols as the legalization kind of moves through the U.S. in different ways, whether that's decriminalization versus legalization, how different states will adopt these kinds of protocols.
Well, this is obviously a guesstimate, but before the FDA turned down the phase 3 data from Lykos, the formerly MAPS, most of us, and these are among the teachers that I showed you the slide of, were thinking that the risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, that it's called REMS, that the FDA will devise for when any drug gets rescheduled, will be minimalistic, because the FDA doesn't regulate therapy. It never has. And as we saw in August last year, it's really uncomfortable with regulating, and they can be moved in multiple directions around what's good or what isn't. So we're actually hoping the FDA will ask the people who will be given permission to do the work to figure out how to do standardization. And the development of associations and boards in this field, I think, is very important. We need it. We need a place for people to go to and complain if they feel like they weren't treated well by someone who gave them a psychedelic. We need to vet people who get graduated from any training program, that they got a substantial enough training for them to be able to get a license or a certification in that particular province or state, let alone country. And that doesn't exist right now, but usually professional organizations get created by the professions themselves. So I'm guessing that's where we're going to go. And the standardization process will be messy, because people will be arguing about what is or isn't a competency. And there'll be a lot of backroom dealing, and you'll hear rumors of things going well or negatively, but it has to happen. We have to figure this out. As I understand it, the EMA and its version of risk evaluation and mitigation strategies may not be poised to be too standardizing either, and Health Canada certainly hasn't. And as I have been told about Australia, Australia's been more assuming that the clinicians can make the good judgment. Whether that is all good or not, I don't know. In Oregon, you have to have a high school degree to become a facilitator in Oregon. Ask me what I think about that. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please give another round of applause to
Oh.
Dr. Janis Phelps.
Thank you.